welcome to another fun stocking Christmas in July edition. This year, once again, I will be using the City Tweed Aran Heavy Worsted Weight yarn, because if you followed along with Christmas in July, there are previous years that use the same yarns, and that way you can create a collection of various stockings, which is really fun to do. This year is really special where we're doing a design your own stocking version, or you can also make the one I'm going to show in this video. This video will have the base pattern for this year's Christmas in July, and this is the knit version. For the knit version of the stocking, you will want to have the yarn. I'm using the colors Romance, Toad, and Snowshoe, but feel free to choose whichever colors you would like to use for your stocking. You can get really creative with it. You'll also want a 5mm needle. I will be working this on circulars. I find it easier to use that magic loop method, but of course you're welcome to use DPNs and distribute the stitches as you like. If you would like to have a stitch marker to mark the beginning of the round, grab one of those, a tapestry needle to weave in those ends, and scissors to fasten off. And then if you would like, I can find these faux leather or leather tabs at the craft store. These are great for making a tab for the top of the stocking, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started by casting on for this beautiful stocking. Now this knit stocking is created from the toe up this time. I've done it from the top down in previous years, but this year I'm doing from the toe up, and my main color, my color A, will be the snowshoe color. Now I've included a chart for this free version you can also find on my blog. But if you're designing your own, feel free to design your own. For this, notice it's just in color A and color B. Color B is the darker areas. I have two colors here because I'm going to be mixing it up. I'm going to work this first section with the color A as the white blocks on this chart and the color B with the red. And then for this here, I'm going to work the color B as green. This section I'll do red, this section I'll do green, and this section I'll do red, just to kind of mix it up a little bit. So you can really throw in as many colors as you would like for this stocking. Now for the toe of the stocking, I'm going to be using a long tail cast on. I'm trying to leave about an 8-inch tail when we're casting on here. And I'm going to cast on 8 stitches. Now here's where you're going to distribute these 8 stitches amongst your needles, whether you're using DPNs or for this one, I'm going to be using the magic loop. So I'm going to kind of step these 8 stitches back here, and I'm going to put 4, I'm going to split this right in the middle, 4 on the front, 4 on the back. I'm going to pinch this cord in half, and now we have distributed our stitches where we need them. So you can see I'm going to pull these down the needles so we can see here. I've got 4 on the front and 4 on the back, and now I'm ready. This is me joined to work in the round. So I've got my tail end here, and then I'm going to pull this back needle out, and then I'm going to start by working across these front needles. So for this round, we're going to be doing some increasing. So we have casted on 8 stitches here, and now it's time for us to do a little bit of increasing. To do that, we are going to be doubling the amount of stitches we have on here. We're going to take it from 8 stitches to 16. So what I will do is I'll insert my needle, and I will knit in the front and the back of each stitch around. So don't pull that off of the left needle until you've knit in the front and the back. So I'm going to knit in the front and the back of each stitch. Once you have worked all the stitches on this front needle, this is where, using the magic loop method, we'll distribute our stitches a little bit. We're going to go ahead and turn this. We're going to rotate, and now I want this front needle to go all the way in, and then we're going to bring the back out. So we're working around in a circle. We're just working it with that magic loop method, and then you'll load the front stitches, and we will also be knitting these into the front and the back of each. So we have increased from 8 stitches to 16 stitches for this round. Now for round 3, we are going to be knitting in each stitch around without increasing. We're simply going to knit each stitch around for round 3. Now we are on to round 4, and round 4 is an increasing round. So what we're going to do for round 4 is we will knit in the front and the back of the first stitch, and then we will knit in the next. And we will be repeating that step all the way around. So knit in the front and the back, and then knit the next. This will increase on round 4 from 16 stitches to 24 stitches. For round 5, we simply knit in each stitch around, and then we come back for round 6, and for round 6 we will knit in the front and the back, and that's an increase, and then we will knit 2. And that's our repeat around. So we'll knit front and back, and then knit 2. And then for round 7, we will simply knit in each stitch around. But on round 6 that we're increasing, we will increase from 24 stitches to 32 stitches. For round 8, we will knit in the front and the back, and then we will knit 3 stitches. And that's our repeat around. So once again, for round 8, we're knitting into the front and the back of the next stitch, and then we are knitting 3. When we increase around for round 8, we will increase to 40 stitches, and then for round 9, we will simply knit in each stitch around. For round 10, we will knit into the front and the back of this first stitch, and then we will knit 4. So once again, for round 10, we'll knit in the front and the back of the next stitch, and then knit 4. And this will increase the stitch count to 48 stitches for round 10, and for round 11, simply knit in each stitch around. Now for round 12, as I'm sure you have guessed, we're increasing again by knitting in the front and the back of the first stitch, and then we will knit into each of the next 5 stitches. And what this does is this will increase our stitch count to 56 stitches. And that's the number we've been getting to, is 56 stitches. So I'm going to knit in the front and the back, and then knit for 5. So this round 12 is our last increasing round that we will be doing. Now for rounds 13 through 15, I simply knit without increasing to get a little bit more length to the toe, but now we are ready to start the foot of our stocking. But I want to point out we still have a hole here, but what you can do is you can take your tapestry needle and you can loop through each stitch and then pull that tight to close that and weave in the end. I'm going to come back and do that in a minute, but don't worry, it works quite nicely to get rid of that hole in the toe of our stocking. First, I want to talk about changing colors. Now we really shouldn't need to fasten off. We can carry our yarn up the inside of our stocking, because let's get honest, no one's going to look at the inside of our stocking. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to follow this chart. And for this next round, I'm doing that in a solid color, but I am switching that to the color red. So I'm going to grab my red yarn, leaving a little bit of a tail if I wanted to weave it in. Full confession, when it's on the inside of my work, I rarely do. I just tend to tuck those ends in. And then I'm going to start knitting in the next color, in the color red, for this round. And then I will come back and do the next round. Now for round 2, you'll see that we're working every other stitch in either color A or color B. Now you can do this by knitting and then dropping the yarn and picking up the next color and knitting the next stitch, and continuing to do that by dropping and picking up stitches. The alternative way to doing that is to carry a strand in each hand. So when we're knitting, we have 2 different styles of knitting. That's continental or English style. Before this, if you want to learn to do a little bit of both, so if you can do each style of knitting, you can go ahead and do the color work by doing one color in one style of knitting, and then using your right hand to do the English style of knitting. So you've noticed I've been knitting continental, but I do know how to knit the English style, and I've mainly learned it only so that I could do this with color work. I find that my floats are more even, and it does go much faster without having to set the yarn down, and I just work whichever color I'm doing from that hand. So I know I'm working all color B from this left side and all of my color A from the right side. So we're just simply going to be working every other stitch all the way around. So I have gone ahead and done round 3 and 4 since they were just solid colors in either the red or our color A. And now we're at round 5, and I am going to change my color B, so the gray area. Instead of using the red, now I'm going to bring in a strand of green. Now you have some options here. Because I'm using more colors, I'm going to have more balls of yarn hanging off my knitting. I can either cut the red and bring it back in later, or you can let it sit and work around it. It's really whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you need to do to avoid tangles. Now for this round 5, I'm going to start by doing the very first stitch as the color A, and then the next stitch will be in my new color, the color B. And this is where I will go back to working both the left and right hands for that color work. If you've never done it, I highly recommend doing it. It does take time. Like be very, very patient with yourself in learning it. It took me a long time to feel comfortable doing it, but it's well worth the process. Or just use whatever you're comfortable with. Then I'll be knitting the next 3 with the color A. Notice I'm not as comfortable with English style. And then 1 with the color B. And we'll be working this round 5 all the way around, and I'll be keeping the green through round 7. But this is how I like to do the color work. But I want to point out right now, all of our floats, so when we're switching colors behind back here, we're floating colors along the back. All of our floats have been pretty minimal. We really haven't had to worry about them yet. They're not very far apart, and it's looking really nice. But when we get up into this area, so for round 10 and even round 9, we have very, very long floats happening. So I'm going to work until I get to round 9, and then I want to talk about what you should do when there's too long of a float to really safely carry it on the back and have the front still look nice. So I'll work until round 9 and come on back. So now I am at round 9, and I've done the first 4 stitches, and then I've done 1 in the color B, and then you notice we have this extremely long stretch before we're going to be working the color B again. I've worked 3 stitches, and now for this next stitch, I want to make sure that I'm catching my floats on the back so they're not really long. If they get too long, they tend to pull in our stitches on the front and they don't lay quite right. So I've inserted my needle into the next stitch as if to knit it, and I'm going to wrap going underneath the needle to the back with my color B, and then I'm going to grab my color A as if I were ready to knit, and then I'm going to take the color B and go back the opposite way from where I came, and then finish the stitch. So we don't see the color B on front. What's happened is on the back we've caught that float so that it sits nicely, and then I'm going to knit a few more. And then in this next stitch, I'm simply going to, from coming under the needle, place the color B strand around, then get ready to knit my color B, take the color A, take the color B back out, opposite of the way that you brought it up, and then finish that stitch. And it really catches those floats nicely on the back so that it sits and your stitches are really nice on the front. Like I said, if we have too long of a float, 1, if you're stuffing stuff into the stocking, it has a high chance of catching and snagging if there's that long of a float. And for 2, if it's too long of a float, it might pull your stitches kind of weird. It's hard to get that perfectly straight with the float when you've got it so long. Now you will notice that sometimes it can peek through between the stitches, but I don't think it's really all that noticeable, and it works great with this textured yarn to do it this way. So once again, insert your needle, bring the color B around from the back to the front of the needle, then get ready by getting the next color A ready to knit as if you were going to knit it, and then take the color B from the front to the back of the needle, so the opposite way we came, and then simply knit that stitch. And that's how we're going to work our floats when we're working really long stretches between stitches. and it will look really, really nice. So from here on out, you have all the tools to complete the foot of the stocking. So I'm going to have you work the rest of the Fair Isle color work for the foot of the stocking. And then when we come back, we'll talk about how we are going to do the heel and split for that heel. So now that I've worked up the color work portion of the foot, the next thing that we are going to be doing is working in section for the heel. So we're going to be doing a heel that we come back and work later, but there are two ways you can do this. You can start this round by knitting 17, placing the next 22 stitches on a stitch holder and doing a thumb cast on of 22 stitches, and then knitting the last 17. But I also want to show you how to do this as a provisional cast on if you want. So to do a provisional cast on, we're still going to knit the first 17 stitches in this round, but once we get there, you'll need a little bit of cotton yarn. I like to grab cotton yarn to do this with because it slides out easily when we need to come back to it. And if you want, grab a crochet hook to help you out with this method. So I'm going to knit the first 17 stitches, and then we're going to talk about the provisional cast on to make space for this heel. So now that I've worked the first 17 stitches, I want to set up to do a provisional cast on. And I'm going to take my crochet hook and some cotton yarn, and I'm simply going to chain more stitches than what we're doing. I want to have a few extra stitches on each side of this. So instead of chaining 22 stitches, I might go ahead and chain 26 just so we've got a little bit of wiggle room, and I'm not going to make these chains too tight. Once you've created your chains, you can go ahead and fasten off this yarn. So we can cut this small piece of cotton yarn, and then we can pull this end through. And now we're ready for our next steps. Now I like to remember which end I ended this chain with, because later we can simply undo it, and we're going to unravel this when it's time for us to do that, when we're ready to work these stitches again. So this is a nice little stitch holder happening here. So I'm going to go back to my stocking, and we need to cast on 22 stitches. But we're going to do this by inserting our needle into the part of this chain, and then we're going to knit. And what this does is the cotton yarn is holding our stitches in place just for a time, and that way we can come back and work them for the heel. So this is the provisional cast on. If you'd like to use a crochet hook to help you out here, I always have the hardest time sometimes working into something like this and just pulling up those knit stitches. So sometimes I'll grab a crochet hook, and I'll help myself out of it here because I am a strong crocheter, and I'll pull up the loop that I need, and then I'll go ahead and place that correctly onto my needle if I'm struggling at all. But we want to do this for 22 stitches across this chain, and this is our way of casting on so that we can come back and work it later. If you don't want to do it this way, a thumb cast on can work just as well, and we can pick up those stitches when we come back to work the heel. But a provisional cast on way, I do like it a little bit better. It is a bit cleaner, and it's a great way to just set these stitches aside while we're casting them on. So I'm going to do this for 22 stitches and come on back. All right, so now that I have 22 stitches casted on here, I can just let this sit. And if some of these tail ends drive you crazy, you can cut them a bit shorter to get them out of your way. And now we're going to go back, and we are going to handle the stitches that are still sitting on our needles. The easiest way to do this is to also take some cotton yarn, or if you have a professional stitch holder, that's fine too. I tend to just grab cotton yarn. I find it the easiest. And I'm going to go ahead, and I'm simply going to cut a piece of cotton yarn here. And now for the next 22 stitches that are still on my needles, I'm simply going to slip them to that cotton yarn to hold them in place until I'm ready to come back to them as well. So they'll just sit on this piece of cotton yarn. I'm going to go ahead and slip 22 stitches onto this yarn holder. So now I've slipped 22 stitches. A lot of times I'm just a bit paranoid about this string getting pulled out either by my cute little Luna dog or a kid. So I will just tie a bow or tie a knot because I can cut it later. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'll remove some of these excess strands because I don't really like them in my way. But I can now just let the heel portion of this sit. We're going to pretend in a way like it doesn't exist. We're going to skip on past it and come back to it later. So what I like to do here is to readjust my stitches a little bit to how they were before, where I'm placing half of my stitches on the front and half of my stitches on the back. So still working that magic loop method, I'm going to pull this out. I've got 11 stitches here and 11 stitches of the heel on the back, which splits this evenly in half again. And we still have 17 stitches left on this stocking for this round, and we're going to go ahead and knit those stitches to complete this round that splits for this heel, and we're going to come back to work it later. All right, so now I want you to get this total visual of how we did this. So here we have the 22 stitches that we did a provisional cast on, the 22 stitches that we just placed on a stitch holder, and now we have this area that we will come back and work later for the heel. But from here on out, we can work the same number of stitches we were doing before for the leg of the stocking. So this is now where we start doing the next section of color work, which is the leg of the stocking, which I can quickly show you here. This is what it's going to look like for this stocking. And that way we're going to work that color work, rotating colors however you wish. And then after that, we'll do the cuff and come back to the heel. So I'm going to go ahead and work the leg of the stocking in the color work, similar to how we did down here, and then come on back. So now that we have knit the leg of our stocking, we still have the opening here for the heel. We're not going to worry about that quite yet. We're at the top of our stocking, and I'm going to keep with my color B here to work this ribbing. I want to do a fold over cuff. So you can simply do a 2-inch cuff or however long you want for this ribbing for the cuff, or you can do a fold over cuff, which means you would need to do this ribbing for 4 inches. So what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to knit one and purl one. We're doing your basic ribbing. So I'm going to knit one and purl one around and around and around. And I will do this until I have a 4-inch cuff. Now, if you want to, just because you can see how sometimes on this first round, you can really see your purl stitches if you're switching colors here. If you're keeping it as your main color, you're totally fine. But before you start this, if you are changing colors, it's nice to knit one round solid and then go into the ribbing, because then your purl stitches don't hop on the front of this when you're changing colors. So for this, since I changed colors here, I'm going to knit around, and then I'll work the 1x1 ribbing for a total of 4 inches so I can do a fold over cuff, and then I'll come back and we'll be ready for that heel. Now that we have worked this 1x1 ribbing for 4 inches, we can go ahead and we can bind off. Now I'm going to bind off just by doing a basic bind off, but I will bind off in the 1x1 ribbing. So I'm going to still knit the knits and purl the purls, and then take my first stitch over my second stitch, and the next one's a knit stitch. So I'll knit it, take the first stitch on the right hand needle over the second. My next stitch is a purl stitch, so I'll purl it. And this is what we're going to do all the way around until all of our stitches are off of our needles. Then we can fasten off our yarn and weave in our end, and the top cuff is done. And it's really nice to fold it over and have that be squishy. Once again, if you don't want to fold over, you can simply do less stitches, less rounds of this, and just stop whenever you like the height if you're not going to do a fold over. After I get these off the needles, I'll be back to talk about that heel. So now it is time for us to come back to this heel and work it. The first thing we want to do is get our needles back onto these stitches that are being held down here and up here. Now, if you didn't do a provisional cast on up here, that's okay. You're just going to simply pick up 22 stitches across this top edge. So I'm going to start by getting these held stitches back onto my needles. I'm going to remove my cotton yarn as I go. And I'm simply going to be just slipping them from the cotton yarn to the needle. I'm just pulling that cotton yarn out. And this is what we will do across these 22 stitches. So now I'm going to be picking up the stitches from this provisional cast on, and this is where we go to our one side that we can simply pull out this yarn, and then as we start pulling, it's undoing this chain, and this is where we want to grab those stitches as we come to them. So as I undo this, here's where my first stitch is. So as I pull this out, I want to make sure that I'm placing this stitch onto my needle, and I'm going to pull it, and then we'll just simply go to the next stitch and keep on pulling that out. And it looks like I may have, well, here we go. This one I'll show you. I may have, when I was knitting this onto here, gone through the yarn and split it through a stitch, so it's not pulling as easy. I can simply pull, this yarn doesn't matter. We can pull that apart. That way we can keep on going here. Even if you need to, you can cut this cotton yarn. But I'm going to keep it going where I can pull it out easier once I get it, there we go, back together a bit. Sometimes I like to pick up a couple stitches and then pull that strand to release them from that cotton yarn. But this is a way to just kind of have a nice, neat transition as we go into this heel. So this is 22 stitches across here, and I am placing those back onto the needles. All right, now that we have all of our stitches back onto our needles, I'm going to go ahead and grab my color A. I'm going to be working this for the heel, and I'm going to start by knitting all the way around. Now the thing is, we might have a gap on the left and the right as we work these stitches, so you can always leave an extra long tail if you want when you're joining the color A to work it, and that way you can use the tail end to weave in the holes, or you can also kind of pick up some stitches and then knit together on the corners, and I'll show you that over here when I get there. So I'm simply going to start by working that color A and knitting across these bottom stitches at the bottom of the heel. All right, so now after working these stitches, I can go ahead and I can start working along the other side. But if you want to reduce the gaps now because you don't want to come back later with the tail end to close the holes that might happen on each side of this heel, which is totally normal, and you can just grab a tapestry needle and close those later. So now that I've rotated my stitches here, I'm simply going to be knitting across this side as well, and all the way around we'll end up having a total of 44 stitches. And don't worry about the hole on the side here, because like I said, we can use our tail end later to close any of those holes if they happen to be noticeable on each side of this heel. All right, so now that I have 44 stitches, I've knit them all the way around. We're going to start doing some decreasing here. And this is going to get the heel to decrease. We will be decreasing along each side here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this side with a slip, slip, knit. Now to do a slip, slip, knit, SSK decrease, what we will do is we will slip the first stitch as if to knit it and slip the second stitch as if to knit it. And then we're going to place those back onto the left hand needle and then knit through that back loops. So that does a left leaning decrease. And then we are going to knit into the next 18 stitches. Now after knitting 18, there will be 2 stitches remaining on the bottom part of the heel, and we can go ahead and knit those 2 stitches together. Now if you're working this on DPNs and you've got it spread across 4 needles or something like that, you can place stitch markers on each side here so you know like where the beginning of the round is or how you're decreasing. So we're going to repeat that one more time on the other side here, where we're doing the slip, slip, knit, knitting 18, and then knitting 2 together. And that's what completes round 2 for this stocking heel. And then we'll come right back and I'll tell you how to decrease for round 3. So for round 3 and the remaining rounds that we'll be doing here, we'll be doing a total of 8 rounds for this heel. I'm going to start once again by doing a slip, slip, and knit. And then I'm going to knit 16. So we'll just be, because we decreased, we're just going to be knitting the space in between 2 less stitches each time. So now I'm going to do 16, and then on the next round I will knit 14. But basically we're knitting across these bottom stitches until there are 2 left, and then we're going to do a knit 2 together. And then we just repeat that one more time on the other side of this heel. So this decreases each round by a total of 4 stitches. And that's how we're going to work the rest of this heel. So you're going to keep doing that where you do a slip, slip, knit, knit to the last 2 of these bottom stitches and knit those 2 together, and then repeat that one more time. And we're going to continue decreasing that way through round 8 when we have a total of 16 stitches left. So now that we have decreased this to 18 stitches, we can go ahead and we can fasten off our yarn. And then we have two options here in terms of finishing up this to close this opening. You are more than welcome to do the Kitchener stitch, which looks really, really nice. I've done it in previous years, but I thought this year I'd go the more simple route where I'm simply going to close this off the same way that I started the toe, having a circle. I'm simply going to take the stitches with my yarn needle and I'm going to slip them onto the needle, and then we'll just pull this closed as a circle. So I'm just going to slip each stitch to my yarn needle. So now that we've decreased through round 8, the last thing we're going to do is no longer decrease, but just do one round, just simply knitting around, and then we will be ready to slip all of these stitches to our yarn needle. So now that I have them all slipped to that needle, I can go ahead and gently close this by pulling it and getting that opening tight. And then I also like to weave through one more time just to make this super secure. I don't want this to come undone. So you really do want to weave in this end to make sure it doesn't come undone. And I'll weave it one way, turn around, weave it the other way, closing that opening of the heel. And we will be left with a nice heel, but we might have a hole here. And this is what I was talking about. We can simply take the yarn we currently have on our needle and close that, or we can use the tail end from when we started to close this opening so that it's not noticeable. After weaving in my ends, sewing up any gaps I might have seen near the heels, this is looking quite nice. It's been a lot of color work, so the other thing you need to do before this is finished is block it. I never skip blocking when it comes to color work because it makes such a difference, as you can see in the finished photos. To block this, I find go raid your recycling, find a piece of cardboard, and then lay the stocking on top of the cardboard and trace around the stocking about 1/4 inch out from the side, and then using the cardboard cut that out, and you can place it inside of this, and it really does help with the blocking of it and making it look really nice. I'll just spray it down to dampen it, shift it, fix it a little bit, and then let it dry, and it's absolutely perfect. Now, whether you make a knit or a crochet stocking, you may want to put a tab on each side so that you can hang it. Otherwise, you can't hang it. I have instructions in the pattern where if you would like and you would prefer, you can create an I-cord tab. Or another simple way to do so, if you have a couple tools, is with faux leather or leather, whichever one you prefer. I found this one that kind of matches this fox stocking quite well, so I'm going to use that color there. And then I just cut out a couple strips from scraps that I found at the craft store, just long rectangles. The next thing we will need to do in order to create this style of scraps is take a leather hole punch, and I'm going to punch 4 holes on each side in almost a square style shape where I punch them. So I'll do 2 down here and then 2 more. I'll show you this on camera where and then I'm just estimating. Honestly, it looks really cute and really good no matter how it comes out. So kind of pull those out. So now we have these 4 hole punches, and what we will do is we're going to do that again on this side. And then they'll place these inside on the edge, and we're going to take our tapestry needle and our yarn, and we're simply going to stitch an X on here a few times and weave in our ends to secure it. But it's a cute way to join this as a tab, and that way we can hang it. Now, the other nice thing about stitching this to the side, so even if you do an I-cord, it's not a bad idea to stitch it a little bit farther down on the edge of the stocking. And the reason why is it helps kind of tack down the fold over cuff if you did a fold over cuff, so that it stays in place. And the other thing you can do while you've got your needle and your thread happening here is you can weave over, and you can tack down this side too, so you don't have it like plopping up or down if you want, if you think it's going to be an issue. But tacking just down this side really helps a lot. And on the inside of this, yes, I am a little bit lazy here where I just tend to tie it down. I'll tie this knot really tight a few times and cut it. I'm not really worried. I've never had these come undone, but if they did, it'd be a quick fix with a needle and thread. And now I have completed this stocking. We have gorgeous tabs to hang these from wherever we like to hang our stockings, fireplace or a mantle or just on the walls. This is really, really fun to make. I hope you've enjoyed this project and come back for some more fun projects soon.